Philosophers talk to our times towards an ethnography of a self-poisoning mind. And it was Foucault that said it. If he didn't, everybody else thinks he does, so it's the next best thing. In something like The Archaeology of Knowledge. I looked at it yesterday, but it's not a book you can just quickly extract. You have to read it from scratch, and it's a long time since I read it. But fundamentally, each era, each epoch of human thought is bound up with a certain set of statements, a certain set of things that you can say, ways that you can construct meaning, a toolkit if you like. So the kind of statements, the kind of ways you could allude to meaning. A statement is a sequence of signs and symbols that kind of organise the material world, that will allow you to know something and react to that world. So very famously, Foucault says that the letters on a French keyboard, a typewriter, which is something like A-Z-E-R-T, is a statement of identity, but a statement of the way letters are organised, a statement of what it means to be typing. It catches you up then in a system of reacting to the world, a system of knowing. And that each major intellectual epoch has then its own set of questions, its own set of permitted statements of ways you can react to the world. And one of the things Foucault does as an archaeologist of knowledge is trace the relatively quick shifts that took you, for instance, from that era that he will call the classical, so that's the 17th and early 18th century, into the Enlightenment. Quickly, suddenly, the questions shift. What you're allowed to say is no longer quite the same. What you see is no longer quite the same. And the world becomes different. And so different systems of thought. You can't say that progress has happened so much as it exists as different economies of statements with different levels of richness. At that point in Archaeology of Knowledge, Foucault is kind of influenced by structuralism and is talking about the archaeology of structuralism, really. And so he is more relativist than he will later on become, when he isn't a relativist at all. But what is true, so that you can't say that the system that we currently use is anyway better than the system that ran before. That's my point. And that's all fair enough and high incomes. But it seems to me one of the effects of the internet, a world where we all need to be experts very quickly and we all feel ourselves, expertise is at our fingertips. We can just learn about the world. That kind of excitement that was the internet's great gift to humanity in the early 2000s hasn't quite left, and has created a world then where we all become experts in our own little universes. And that creates, to my mind, an overthrow of a single doxa, a single system of statements. You see, within the Foucaultian model, it was relatively straightforward. Who created the statements was a certain priestly caste, be they doctors, or priests, or kings. There was a set of statement makers, and all else was caught up in the statements that they made. And in a society where literacy was not the norm, that was perfectly understandable. In a society where, even if you could read, there was only a limited number of books, that was also terribly understandable. But now we live in a world where there is literally an undefinable number of pieces of writing. You see, the minute you allow AI to write, then there are numbers, the things that you could read, the essays that could have been written, become literally beyond count, because there's always more being written, especially for you. There's always a world that is being created for you and for those that think like you. And one of the effects of that, you could call it the democratization of making statements, but that would be ludicrous because they're not the kind of thing that gets democratized. But what there certainly is there's no longer one, in our era, there is no longer single axes for making statements. On the contrary, we live in rather an uncomfortable world where there are whole different systems for making statements, and we all resent those that are not of our system and need to dismiss them, say that they are rubbish in order to keep us embedded within our own. This is kind of a different economy then. It's not an economy where there is a set of statements that are either made and advanced and changed, but rather a set of statements where we challenge. And you can't challenge sensibly. We challenge through insult, through dismissing, through saying people who vote for the RN are just stupid or just racist. Well, they might be racist, but that's for a reason. They're using race to understand economic disadvantage, and they're certainly not stupid. Or you might well say that people who believe in, let's take something I believe in environmental change, have got obsessed with knowing things and believe in maths and all that sort of stuff. And if you belong to that group in society who maths is always picked on, because it does pick on people, i.e. those who can't do it, they've got a vested interest in dishing those sets of truths and looking for others. Now, as you will notice, I have a horse in this particular race because I do believe in maths. I was an ex-maths teacher, and I certainly do believe in global warming. But I don't believe in global warming. I know in global warming, but that's neither here nor there. The point is that if you are in an argument, if you are in a world where there are conflicting wars about what are legitimate, what makes legitimate statements, which is where I think we are, you will certainly get those people who want to destroy the very possibility of making the statements that allow you to understand global warming. And of course, they've got big money, big oil on their side, and big politics for that matter. So we live then in a world where, let's understand this world. First of all, it's multipolar. So that there is, in the sense that there are more than one system for creating statements. There is certainly a very right-wing system, a very manosphere-type system, but there are other systems. And then there are alliances between the systems. So there is a vaguely left-wing. So it's why the left and the right, on the level of what gets called cultural wars, still very, very much operates. Because they operate as different systems for thinking about statements. There are other things where we clearly haven't created alternative systems. Economics being the classic example. Economics has various schools, all of which make different statements, but are all bound together by the same set of rules, and certainly hasn't devised other ways, although it arguably absolutely needs to. So we live in a system where we've got, on the level of culture wars, we've got lots of different systems of statements that can be made, but on the level of economics, probably not enough. It makes the entire thing really quite uncomfortable, because you'll get people who, yes, really not quite enough. So we don't have an economics that's capable of describing the world in which we live, which is highly problematic, which is one of the reasons I would argue that economics is currently so bankrupt as a discipline, so unable to manipulate the global economy in a way that is useful, and hasn't for, 20 years, a decade, a generation. I only think it's 2008, when the last proper boom happened and then collapsed. So we live in a system where, on the level of culture, on the level of the actual level we do most of our thinking, there are more than one doxa, more than one rule kit for making statements. On the level of the way we understand the economy is we're stuck in an old system. And it makes a very uncomfortable reasoning. More than that, it connives with something. It connives with one of the problems for me of modern thinking. It is all too easy. Our systems of statements, because we have to defend them against others all the time, because they're also bolstered by fears, become very, very divine. So that it becomes terribly easy to rush to conclusions, to say, well, that must be that. It becomes terribly easy then to factor in well-known truths that may or may not be well-known at all, in order to understand the world in which we live in. And that absolutely hinders how we need to react to that world, because it's normally more complicated than the quick move that we're making. Because the problem is with any system of statements is it blinds you to other possibilities, other truths. And actually in a world where you've got many possible statements, you've got an economy that isn't able to understand the world it is in, and an environment that is becoming more and more chaotic. Actually, any system of statements that you're going to be making needs to have the open-ended statement. It needs to have the unforeseen statement, the not quite sure, let's just think about it moment. I always find myself crotcheting around, saying, well, I don't know that's true, simply because I don't want to rush into a simple set of statements that will say that this must be that because that is what I already thought. So, for instance, today in France, I've woken up and there is a slight smell in the air. The air has changed. The question is this plastic smoke from about 50 miles away? Well, it could be. But I wouldn't rush into that conclusion because there are other things that it could be. When the air changes this much, trees do very strange things, and the air is that strange, horrible stillness that tells something is going to happen, and part of the smell is caught up within that. Now, my point here is that it could well be the plastic pollution from miles away, according to that set of systems that would see the current global situation in terms of the predicted prophecy of global destruction. It might be, but it might not be. And I like to keep my statements open. I'm very, very annoying that way. But my point is that keeping them open is no longer the norm. We're rushing to certainties because any system of statements that feels itself under pressure, that knows that there are other systems out there, automatically has an answer for everything. It will conclude too quickly, too urgently, in order to demonstrate its further truth. And so that is a second way we're living in a world where we have multiple different systems of systems of possible truth drivers. It's utterly difficult to live in because it is a world where it is likely that everything gets decided very, very, very quickly. And once it is decided, it is very hard to move people on because they will then start to defend their statements and they start to become a set of well-known and fixed truths. When the internet started, there was amongst the idealists of us an idea that somehow it would make the world better, that we'd all have access to a large amount of knowledge, which is, of course, in a sense true. Our problem, of course, as humans, is that we're not very good at processing large amounts of knowledge, and therefore we develop devices like AI to try and do it for us. Because it is genuinely hard, we tend to resolve, then, a very large amount of knowledge into a system of statements, well-known truths, a sieve, if you like, which allows us to understand the world. And the real problem is that the sieve that needed to be really complicated and able to understand the kind of world that we live in simply isn't, economics. It hasn't particularly changed in the last God knows how many years. Do you remember when there was last time a new economic theory? I don't. We seem to be stuck in the same old one for 50 years, although the world has radically changed since then. So that's on the level of economics, which is on the level of kind of what defines how a base level to the politics happens. But on the level of the way we actually understand the world on the day-to-day, we have far too many systems of knowledge all rushing far too quickly into conclusions. And that is a very difficult position to be in, particularly in a world that is shifting and changing. The actual world itself is becoming more chaotic and more likely to throw up uncertainties, to have minds that are more likely to generate quicker certainties in a world that is more uncertain is an uncomfortable place to even try to pitch your mind. Because the very method by which you pitch it, the thread that you go, is likely to become perpetually under strain, which of course merely reinforces the statements as they wish to define their truth again and again. It's a weird, strange, poisonous mind to be in. As poisonous as this atmosphere. Smoke from fires from God knows where, caught within the air that is changing.